Welcome to This Beautiful Language. We're talking about chapter 7 of Animal Farm. So, in this chapter, if you want a summary of it, it is a really bad winter when there is an execution of so called traitors. Very severe, harsh winter. When the hens have a rebellion because their eggs are going to be sold, and when Snowball is revealed as a traitor from the very beginning in cohorts with Jones, and also when there's food shortages. So in chapter 7, the animals are starting to rebuild the windmill. This time they decided to make it stronger, so instead of 18 inches, they're going for 3 feet in width of the walls. So that means they have to work harder to collect more stone. They work hard throughout the winter, only to find their ration reduced again in January, so they're close to starvation. But of course, the PR machine, the secrecy is in operation. They could not let the outside world discover this. So Napoleon devised a scheme to trick Mr. Whymper, their agent, into believing they were really prosperous and wanted for nothing. We'll talk about his methods there in a moment or two. Napoleon now spent most of his time in the farmhouse and was guarded by the fierce dogs when he did appear outside. Squealer announced that the hens would give up their eggs, which were needed to buy food from the outside. The hens rebelled, but the rebellion was savagely put down. Snowball is now blamed for everything that goes wrong on the farm. Snowball becomes the scapegoat for everything and is completely discredited. Squealer, the PR man, spread the news, false news or fake news, I suppose we would call it today, that Snowball was on Pinchfield Farm and that he was helping Frederick to mount an attack on Animal Farm. He also said that Snowball had been on the side of Jones from the very start. So it's not just malicious lies about Snowball, it's rewriting the start of the rebellion. The animals were amazed and as they thought about it. Okay, I missed out that little bit there, but it's Snowball was supposed to have tried to get the animals defeated and give a signal to Jones at the Battle of the Cowshed. So the animals were amazed as they thought they could remember how brave Snowball had been. Squealer explained that in reality he had only been grazed by Jones' shot and that was part of the ploy. It was only really the courage of Napoleon that rallied the animals and allowed them to drive off the human beings. The terrible purge of the animals occurs in this chapter. So the execution of the traitors that volunteered themselves, apart from the first 4 pigs who were called or brought to the feet of Napoleon by the dogs. The rest volunteered their acts of treachery. So the animals were all ordered to assemble in the yard. Napoleon appears with his 9 huge dogs. The dogs rushed among the animals and dragged out the 4 young pigs who had sometimes made protests at the Sunday meetings. 3 of the dogs attacked Boxer, but he was too powerful for them. The 4 pigs confessed they had been in league with Snowball. The dogs killed him. 3 hens came forward. They confessed that Snowball had incited them to rebel, and they had rebelled over the egg production. They too were killed. Then a goose, 3 sheep and an old ram also confessed to crimes. Now it might seem not important that you know exactly who confessed, but if you're talking about or proving something, if you have exact details to use as examples, that shows your intimate knowledge of the novel. So they were all slaughtered. Naturally, the animals were very unhappy about these events and could not believe that these things were happening on Animal Farm. They could no longer even say what they thought. They were living in constant fear of the fierce dogs. Of course, there's the idea too that they couldn't put what they were thinking into words. They couldn't actually clearly sometimes remember. But even those who did remember and who had concerns didn't voice them. The animals tried to console each other by singing Beasts of England. Squealer then arrived to tell him that the singing of Beasts of England had been forbidden by Napoleon. He explained the rebellion was now over and they no longer needed a revolutionary song. Instead they were to sing a new song which Minimus had written. Okay, some comments then on chapter 7. You remember that Leon Trotsky, like Snowball and Animal Farm, had been driven out of Russia. We talked about that when Snowball was driven out. It became common for the exiled Trotsky to be blamed for everything that went wrong in the USSR. In particular, he was accused of arranging industrial sabotage. So in the questions, we're actually going to look at some of the crimes that Snowball was accused of. The 1930s were a time of terror in the USSR. Stalin set about removing, purging anyone who seemed to oppose him. This Great Terror, that period of time is known as that, resulted in purges, that's a good word, carried out by the secret police against all political opponents, against anyone who seemed to be any kind of threat. Between 1934 and 1937, 7 million Russians were either executed or put into labour camps. And the 1930s were the Depression years, where there were great economic crises around the world, and there were food shortages. In this country, they were called the Hungry 30s. So when you think about chapter 7 and that severe winter and the food shortages, you're to think about the 1930s. So the execution of the animals in chapter 7 represents these purges. Notice how Napoleon is interfering with the reality of the past. So he's rewriting history to make it fit with what he wants. And I suppose if you study history, you know that history can be rewritten and used as propaganda. Compare Squealer's account of the Battle of the Cowshed in this chapter with how it's reported in chapter 4. Now, if you're not from a farming background, a clamp is a heap of vegetables. It's a way of winter storing them, covering them with earth to protect them. In this country, years ago, I think even still some people would have potato clamps. You would cover them with earth, but you would have to cover them with the right depth of earth and also straw to insulate them against the cold weather, or else you would unclamp your potatoes and they would be soft and damaged as they were in chapter 7. Infanticide is the killing of infants, not usually what you refer to a baby animal, but remember Orwell is writing an allegory. Contrary impression, that's self-explanatory, an opposite impression. A clutch is eggs for sitting on so that they can be hatched. So that's why the hens were protesting. I don't think I need to give you the meaning of any of those. Capitulated means to give in. I'm not even going to try and say that word, but it's a contagious disease. And again, it was propaganda. They weren't the 9 birds that died because of them holding out against Napoleon. It was blamed on this contagious disease. Unanimously in complete agreement, a unanimous vote is everybody votes the same way. A spinney, I'm just picking out the words there that you would maybe not have heard of before. It's a small group of trees, a copse, and external and internal. Okay, let's look at the questions. Explain how Napoleon tricked Mr. Whymper into thinking they had plenty of food, and you need to make 2 points. So pause the video and write down your thoughts, and then unpause each time, and you'll hear at least my version of the answers. So you got the sheep to make casual comments about how the rations were increased, and then he filled the storage bins up with sand and just a small layer of meal or feed on top. Number 2, explain about the rebellion of the hens and how Napoleon crushed that. So Napoleon announced that the hens had come into laying because it was springtime. They would be used to sell. 400 eggs was the contract. And the hens wanted to sit on their eggs and hatch them because it was that time of year for little chicks. They decided to go up high into the rafters so that Napoleon couldn't take the eggs off them, but the eggs fell and smashed. So Napoleon took away their rations, and so they finally capitulated. They gave in. Number 3, accusations against Snowball. What was he blamed for? So I'm just going to refer to the book here. He stole the corn, he upset the milk pails, he broke the eggs, he trampled the seed beds, he gnawed the bark off the fruit trees. Anything that went wrong was attributed to Snowball. If a window was broken, a drain was blocked off, the key of the store shed was lost, Snowball was blamed for throwing it down the well, and even when the mislaid key was found, they still believed he had done that. Why did the dogs attack Boxer? Look back at the section when Squealer told them Snowball was a traitor. So on the surface you could say the dogs attacked Boxer because they had this taste of blood when they killed the 4 young pigs. But remember, Boxer was the one who was confused. He said he remembered Snowball being brave at the battles, and he refused to believe it. I'm just going to see if I can find. He said, "I do not understand it." There's some fault in ourselves. Okay. Was there something else that he said earlier than that? I do not believe that Snowball was a traitor at the beginning. Those were Boxer's words. But then he was a little uneasy. But then our leader, Comrade Napoleon, announced Squealer, speaking very slowly and firmly, has categorically stated, comrade, that Snowball was Joan's agent from the beginning. Yes, and from long before the rebellion was ever thought of. Ah, that is different, said Boxer. If Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right. That is the true spirit, cried Squealer, but it was noticed he cast a very ugly look at Boxer with his little twinkling eyes. Okay, so Boxer was also a source of the attack there. Number 5, write about the trial of the animals. Well, the 4 pigs admitted that Snowball had privately admitted to them that he had been Joan's secret agent. They had been secretly in touch with Snowball. They had collaborated with him in destroying the windmill. All false confessions. And their execution was shocking, violently shocking. The dogs promptly tore their throats out. Okay, and then the other animals were listed in the notes there. The 3 hens who were the ringleaders came forward, said that Snowball had appeared to them in a dream and incited them to disobey Napoleon's order. They were slaughtered. A goose confessed to having secreted 6 ears of corn during last year's harvest and eaten them in the night. Then a sheep confessed to having urinated in the drinking pool, urged to do this by Snowball, and 2 other sheep confessed to murdering an old ram, a special devoted follower of Napoleon, by chasing him round and round a bonfire when he was suffering from a cough. So these crimes are laughable. It's a crime to have Snowball appear to you in a dream. It's a crime to take 6 ears of corn. It's a crime for an animal to urinate freely. These are ridiculous crimes. So the tale of confessions and executions went on until there was a pile of corpses and the air was heavy with the smell of blood. Okay, so give a full account of that. And what were the opening lines of the song? Animal farm, never through me shalt thou come to harm. And of course Orwell is satirising there. He is a satirical writer. He's satirising national anthems, patriotic songs, etc. So I'm not going to read all of this here because that's just a summary again. You read through it. Little details like that show your intimate knowledge, like the black Minorca pullets instead of just the 3 hens that led the rebellion. Okay, let's see if we can just look at the commentary. These are from 2 different authors, so it's very useful to read both. In this chapter, Napoleon's dictatorship shows its disregard for the facts. Its merciless brutality. In the first place, the animals have to accept, because Napoleon says so, that Snowball was a traitor on the day of the Battle of the Cowshed, despite the fact that they remember otherwise. Secondly, they witness the forced confessions and the executions. Even Boxer is attacked. Why? When they go to the grassy knoll where the windmill is being built, Clover thinks back on Major's speech before he died and thinks how far they have gone from what he would have intended. So that little bit about Clover, we will come back and do an essay on the character of Clover. She's the maternal character. She is the thoughtful character, but incapable of expressing her her thoughts in words. But that little scene of her sitting after the executions with the animals around her, and then starting to quietly and slowly sing Beasts of England through 3 times. And of course that's a technique. 3-fold repetition is very powerful. And just before that there was a 3-fold determination on Clover's part. She would remain faithful, work hard, and carry out the orders that were given to her. Of course, you could probably call that the 4th one, and accept the leadership of Napoleon. That's on page 59. But just keep that in mind when you go to do an analysis of the character of Clover, for that's an important scene for her. The reader should also remind himself of old Major's speech in chapter 1, compare with what's happened in this important chapter. In doing so, he will be contrasting the ideals of communist socialism with how Orwell saw Stalinistic Russia debasing those ideals. So the difference between Marxism as outlined, or you could call it communist socialism, outlined by old Major in his speech, compared to now the violence, the shocking executions of a Stalinistic type regime. You can also think about why did they have to discredit Snowball? Why did Napoleon have to go round snuffing for the scent of Snowball? Why was that so important? Well, do you think it's maybe a tactic because things were getting terrible on the farm? There were food shortages, there were many rebellions, there was an uneasiness, They weren't doing financially well or in terms of food supply. The windmill had been blown down in the storm, so success was limited, if there was any success. So to me it was a tactic by the leadership. So if we can take the focus of the animals off the shortages and off the problems and the trials and the hardships and blame Snowball, then it takes the focus of us, who are supposed to be the brains of this operation, who are supposed to be running a tight ship here, a successful regime. So you can think about why. Don't just say, yes, they discredited Snowball and that reminds us of such and such a time. There were executions because of their treachery with Snowball. They saw him in a dream and listened to him. Think about why there was this overall tactic. So you're still working on the essay on the expulsion of Snowball in chapter 5 as a turning point. So you can now add another paragraph about the execution of the traitors. So I'm not going to give you points or anything. I want you to work on that yourself. So chapter 7 brings in that tactic of taking the focus of the failure of the leadership to lead them into success, and diverting attention from that to blaming Snowball, making him a scapegoat. So keep working at that essay, keep working at a timeline on the novel so that you're aware of the cycle of the seasons. So this is the end of chapter 7 of Animal Farm.